afford gas for their car. While U.S. consumer spending has risen 5 months in a row, mainly due to rising prices, the U.S. savings rate has fallen to 3.1%, its lowest since October of 2008. 43% of Americans now have less than $10,000 saved for retirement. What's going to happen when the U.S. government is inevitably forced to default on its Social Security obligations? Retirement will become a thing of the past. Americans getting ready to retire need to assume now that Social Security won't be there.
Bernie Madoff is in jail for a reason. He's in jail because Ponzi schemes don't work. They don't work when the private sector tries them, and they don't work when the government tries them. We have a coming disaster in Social Security if we don't do something, and do something about it soon.
Retirees will soon be forced to re-enter the workforce, which could send the unemployment rate up to Great Depression levels. The only area of our economy that has been seeing increasing employment is the government. The government recently hired 1.2 million temporary workers for the U.S. Census. While most economists are hailing the U.S. Census as being an economic boom, these census workers are adding no production to our economy. They are merely collecting a check that will allow them to compete against all of us for the purchasing of consumer goods. Including benefits, the average federal worker now earns twice as much as the average private sector worker. While incomes in the private sector are contracting, federal workers are receiving a 2% pay raise in 2010 after receiving a 3.9% pay raise in 2009.
How can that be? I mean, they're supposed to be civil servants. They're supposed to work for us. Or was it the Twilight Zone? You know, there was a time when the government workers actually earned less, right? They really were servants. Who's the servant now?
The U.S. national debt is now $12.8 trillion. However, the U.S. government is refusing to include the debts of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac on its balance sheet, when these are now government-controlled entities. Including the Fannie-Freddie debt of $6.3 trillion, our real national debt is $19.1 trillion. Once you include our $60 trillion in unfunded liabilities for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, our total federal obligations have now reached $79 trillion, or more than 5.5 times our GDP of $14.2 trillion. It will be impossible for our debts to ever be repaid without the U.S. printing the money and creating hyperinflation. America's greatest business success story of the past decade has been Apple Inc., maker of the iPod, iPhone, and the new iPad. For fiscal year 2009, Apple recorded a $2.28 billion expense for federal income taxes. The U.S. would need to see the creation of 700 companies like Apple in the next year just to generate enough tax revenue to balance our projected 2010 budget deficit. This is impossible. The only way our economy can truly recover is for the government to dramatically slash spending across the board and eliminate unnecessary departments like the Department of Energy.
The reason they started it was they were going to end our dependence on foreign oil. That was the goal. That's why we have it. Well, you know, when we started it, we imported about 50% of our oil. Now we import 70% of our oil. It's been a colossal failure. They spend $30 billion a year. Abolish it.
Besides the Department of Energy, our country also needs to abolish the Department of Education. The cost to fund the U.S. Department of Education in 2009 was $63.5 billion, up 37% from $46.3 billion spent in 2002. The average annual tuition for a private 4-year U.S. college in 2009 was $26,273, up 41% from the average tuition in 2002 of $18,596. It's no coincidence that college tuition costs are rising almost in parallel with the Department of Education's wasteful spending. In China, approximately 25 million students pay an average of $400 to $2,200 per year for public and private college tuition. Not only is the cost to attend college in China less than 1/10 the cost in the U.S., we bet it's pretty safe to say that the Chinese are becoming better educated than Americans because in China they don't have unemployment and food stamps to fall back on. The Chinese are motivated to become educated and work hard to add production to their economy, because if they don't have a job, they will starve. The average American has a mindset where they want to get paid and live well while being lazy as possible and doing as little work as possible. Why have a job in America if you can sit home and get paid for doing nothing? Let the Chinese produce goods for us to consume for free. Many American employers are beginning to realize not only is it cheaper to outsource work to China and India, and not only are the workers there motivated to do a better job, but there are less liabilities when outsourcing work overseas. The recently passed Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act mandates that all businesses with 50 or more employees give new mothers a reasonable break time to breastfeed their babies or use a breast pump, and to provide them a secluded place other than restrooms wherein to perform these maternal duties. Almost all employers in the U.S. would have the common sense and decency to do this on their own, but now American businesses are being needlessly burdened in order to comply with another new unnecessary regulation. Employers in the U.S. are penalized when they create jobs in this country. Minimum wage laws alone have destroyed millions of entry-level jobs we could have had in the U.S. Chicken of the Sea recently had to close down its plant in American Samoa and lay off 2,041 individuals who pack tuna because of the 50-cent increase in the American minimum wage. The simple act of eliminating the current $7.25 per hour minimum wage and implementing a new $7.25 per hour maximum wage for government employees would go a long way in helping rebalance America's unstable economy. Unfortunately, what's going on in Washington today is a charade. If the Republicans were in power, they would have supported the recently passed health care bill. There is absolutely no difference between Republicans and Democrats. Neither of them are for limited government and protecting the Constitution. The very existence of the Federal Reserve and the printing of fiat currency is unconstitutional, yet there is still no widespread outrage about it. Americans are distracted by the daily debates in Washington and about whether to raise or lower taxes. But considering that federal tax receipts have remained relatively constant as a percentage of GDP over periods of many decades, proves that taxes are a moot issue. Americans are already taxed to the hilt. Any additional taxes will bring in less tax revenues. There is no chance of our country ever paying off its national debt and unfunded liabilities through taxation. Americans will ultimately feel the pain for all of the government's wasteful spending through inflation. Inflation is currently the last thought on the average American's mind, but soon it will be their primary concern.
Inflation merely postpones problems. It diverts resources into sectors where they wouldn't otherwise go and where an undisturbed economy would not have allocated them. Eventually, resources, including labor, need to go where the market wants them to go. There's no avoiding that.
The U.S. is currently in a brief period of euphoria where the Federal Reserve's monetary inflation has created the appearance of an economic recovery without the devastating side effects of massive price inflation. Although it is possible for the stimulus-induced melt-up to last for another year or two without hyperinflation, it will without a doubt end in an economic holocaust that completely wipes out the savings and income of the middle class.
The stimulus provided by inflation is due to the errors which it produces. That's where your stimulus comes from. Inflation is making possible the propping up of things that shouldn't be propped up and the starting of things that shouldn't be started. So these things are going to have to be liquidated anyway, and the correction will be all the worse.
The Federal Reserve created the real estate bubble when it tried to keep the dot-com bubble artificially inflated by lowering interest rates in 2003 down to 1%. The recession that we needed to have in 2003 so that the free market could rebalance the economy simply never occurred. In a last-ditch effort to correct our economic imbalances caused by the Federal Reserve, the free market made a desperate attempt to enter the U.S. into a depression in late 2008. The Federal Reserve lowered interest rates to 0% and the depression never occurred. They simply kicked the can down the road. Heroin addicts need to go through withdrawal in order to get healthy. They can't simply shoot larger doses of heroin and stay high forever. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke is just like a heroin addict, only his drug is quantitative easing.
Why do these bubbles keep happening? How come they never learn their lesson? Try talking to an addict.